Hello, church, and Merry Christmas. Many of you are probably familiar with the song, The 12 Days of Christmas, but what you may not be familiar with is the actual 12 days of Christmas. Historically, Christmas has long been observed by Christians as a season of 2 weeks. The season begins on Christmas Day and stretches over 12 days and 2 Sundays, making the 2 weeks. During this time, Christians typically read and reflect on the incarnation of Jesus. Stories like Simeon and Anna at the dedication of Jesus at the temple and Jesus losing his family are reminders that beyond Christmas Day, the incarnation of Jesus and the childhood of Jesus holds a real value for Christians. Another text that highlights the importance of this incarnation of Jesus is in Paul's letter to the Galatians. The word of the Lord from Galatians chapter 4, verses 4 through 7. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, in order to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as children. And because you are children, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a child. And if a child, then also an heir, through God. Paul speaks these words into a specific context. The Christians in the region of Galatia were divided along ethnic lines, arguing on how Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians were to coexist. So Paul, writing into that context, penned these words about the importance of the incarnation. He is reminding the Galatians that while Jesus was born under the covenant God had made with Israel, he was born for the purpose of opening up the promise of God to all the world. God was made flesh so that all flesh might be included as children of God. Or to keep with Paul's own poetry, a child was born so that all might become children of God. No longer was the promise of God's people restricted to one nation, to one people. Now, thanks be to Jesus, the whole world has been offered adoption as children of God. And perhaps that whole issue of Jewish-Gentile relations seems old hat or irrelevant today. And in many ways, it might be. But Paul's underlying premise is just as important today as it was when he put those thoughts on papyrus all those years ago. The redemption and the salvation offered by God is available to everyone. And that is a timeless gospel truth, applicable to all people for all time. But if we skip over the incarnation and the birth of Jesus and jump straight to the cross, we can miss the importance of a text like Galatians 4. If we limit the impact and work and import of Jesus to the cross, then we run the risk of privatizing or individualizing Jesus. When we limit Jesus to the cross, we typically speak in transactional language. We say things like, Jesus died for my sins. Jesus died so that I can be saved. And we sing songs like, Can He Still Feel the Nails, as we ponder the effects of our own personal sins on a crucified Jesus who was crucified for me personally. Sure, in the back of our minds, we know that the cross was for everyone, but it seems so much more common that we speak of the cross in personal, individual terms. Paul counters that individualization with the incarnation. When Paul tells the Christmas story, he emphasizes the universality of the event. God gave us all the child Jesus so that we might all be called children of God. And God gave us the Spirit of Jesus that cries, Abba, Father, so that just as the child Jesus is a child of God, we might all be considered children of God. It seems that, for Paul, the birth of Jesus is an all-encompassing event that connects all of humanity, unifying everyone under one God, despite any and all of our differences. And to rephrase that just one more time, Paul is saying that the child Jesus was born to all of us, not just you or me. And so we are all children of God. And even though today we don't have Jewish-Gentile feuds in our churches, I think it is very important to remember Paul's words as a challenge to our instinct to individualize Jesus, especially at Christmas. Christmas is already so easily perverted into a celebration of self, as from Black Friday to Christmas Day, where we are tempted to binge on self-fulfillment and instant gratification and overflowing wish lists. If we aren't careful, it would be easy for Christmas to become about getting what we want. And challenging that temptation to make Christmas about me, Paul reminds me that the birth of Jesus is about everyone. The gift of God's Son was given to everyone. We would be wise to heed Paul's words and try to purge our vocabulary of the idea that Jesus was born for me, or that Jesus was crucified for me, lest we one day start to think of ourselves more highly than we ought. And so I hope that this Christmas season serves as a reminder of a couple of points. First, that the birth of Jesus matters for more than the purpose of Jesus dying on the cross. The incarnation of God's love in the baby born in the manger has an intrinsic value, apart from the death of the Messiah. It is not fair to the story of the life of Jesus to say that he was born only to die. He was born so that we might be called children of God, and he was born so that he could live a life that gives us an example of how to live our own lives. The life, the incarnation of Jesus matters, apart from the death of Jesus. And second, I hope that Paul's words remind us all to guard our hearts from the selfishness that can so easily creep into Christmas. Christmas is a time to remember that God gave the gift of his Son to everyone, and that gift is the one that we celebrate each Christmas. Not all of the gifts under the tree, but the one gift of God's Son. It's the difference between celebrating because Jesus was born and celebrating the fact that Jesus was born. Jesus' birth is not simply a reason to celebrate. It is what we celebrate. And finally, I hope that you hear in Paul's words a reminder of how truly incredible it is that we can all be considered children of God. I hope that we never become numb to the wonder of such a miracle. That we belong to God because God sent his Son to be born to us is a truth that I think forever shapes who we are as God's people. So, in the words of the Wexford Carol, I remind you, good people all, this Christmas time, consider well and bear in mind what our good God for us has done in sending his beloved Son. This Christmas season is a time for us to remember and celebrate the gift of God's Son, born to all of us, so we might all become children of God. Hold on to that throughout the season and revel in the truth of that. Enjoy and celebrate the fact that you are now one of God's children. Merry Christmas. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and may God make God's face to shine upon you and give you peace.